Robocop Rogue City is incredible. It is such a good game. It has no right to be, much like Terminator Resistance by the same team from a few years back. I think not everyone, I think a lot of people looked at it and dismissed the hell out of it. It's a licensed game. It's by this sort of like a team that did a kind of rubbish Rambo game a while back, and it's obviously it's not going to have the polish of a AAA production. It's not going to have the inventiveness or any of the artistry of an indie production. It's just like, who is this for? It's B tier nonsense. Actually, Robocop Rogue City, the best 7 out of 10 I've played in years.
It's a fantastic game. It's one of those B-tier games, like you say, that is really brave in its mechanical direction, that they've really, really tried to make everything thematically appropriate to rather than, you see a lot of, you mentioned AAA games there, and with a lot of AAA games, it feels like gameplay soup that they're just throwing in and box sticking all of these different mechanics. But with Rogue City, it feels like they're choosing the things that really fit the character and fit the world, and it really comes out as a better sum of its parts. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, everything is so curated here. There's nothing there that feels like it's just been put in because games have to have that now. So, for example, in this game, you do a lot of detective work in sort of semi-open world areas, instanced areas where, like, the game is not set in an open world Detroit by any means, but like each kind of chapter of the game has its own kind of corresponding area. Some of them are bigger than others, and the first one that you go into is just a portion of old Detroit set around the courthouse, and it's like, it's dilapidated, kind of this extraction of what happens to America after Reaganomics has really started to bite. That's what the first film is about. It's about taking Reagan's America and imagining how on earth that what on earth that becomes decades later. And we're currently living in that for real. So it's like, it's really prescient, actually, how right they got a lot of it. The militarization of the police, the privatization of every conceivable public service, and the general kind of collapse in living standards that would cause.
Yeah, and the grift and investment culture as well. That's a big part of it. The satirization of that.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's all there. And what I love about this game is that it really understands the source material, and it understands why the source material is good, and also why it's appealing. It understands why it was popular in the first place. Because I don't think the original film is as beloved and got as popular as it did because people went into it expecting to be presented with like a compelling satire of contemporary kind of 80s America. I don't think they went into it expecting to be told expecting the emotional core of a story of a man who essentially has his identity stolen from him by a ravenous kind of corporation. By greed, essentially. This is someone who is consumed by greed. The greed of the time, the greed of like the political climate, the greed of the people around him, the greed of the criminals that torture and kill him, etc., etc. I don't think anyone goes into it with those kind of lofty intellectual ideas that the film is kind of like about on a higher level. People went into it because it's about a fucking robot cop who shoots people in the dick. And he looks cool, and it's and like that's the hook. You get into it because it looks cool. It's about a robot, and much like Terminator, it's got a lot going on underneath the surface that makes you think about it for years and decades afterwards.
Yeah, I think that Robocop is such a weird franchise because I remember when I was a kid, obviously. I don't think I was even born when it came out. When did the original film come out?
87.
I wasn't born for 6 years. toys. But
Oh, Jesus.
when I was a kid, probably less than 10, I had like a sort of, it was one of those toys that felt about 10 feet tall to me, that was probably about a foot tall, but it was a really big Robocop.
Smoking is dangerous, not to mention illegal.
I don't give a shit about either.
Then you must suffer the consequences.
No one in this country values independent thinkers anymore.
And it, like you say, it's really deeply ironic that it's this kind of stripped of its context, consumerist manifestation given to a child of this, of this satire of a policeman being stripped of his humanity and his personality, forced into brutally policing the working class, essentially. And I think it within a gaming context, it's also deeply ironic that you're kind of gleefully participating in this ultra-violence that's meant to kind of lampoon that police brutality and the callousness of Reaganomics, like you say. And I think philosophically, again, from a gaming context, I think it plays most like a sort of budget version of Deus Ex Mankind Divided, or
Yes.
Is that the second one? What's the second one? Mankind.
Yeah, Human Revolution was the first.
Yeah,
one.
Mankind Divided.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to that, where you're kind of clumping around these semi-open streets. You're solving detective cases, and the side quest design is absolutely what I look for in a game, where it's a surprising and twisty, and even though there aren't very many huge choices that you can make that really branch the storylines or whatever, the choices that you do make and the stories that you're wading through feel organic and decision driven, even if you're not necessarily making them. And that's just so much better than having these empty environments that, and you think about something like Starfield, where the side quest design is very pedestrian in terms of saying, go and get me this thing, and then you get it, and then you give it to the person, and that's the end of it. The side quests in Robocop are just the complete opposite of that, where you'll go somewhere and something unexpected happens, and then you have to go do something else, and then and it's just fantastic the way that
you're doing like actual detective work.
Yeah.
Which is like, you're doing like actual sort of procedural, like the first act of the game is essentially a police procedural, and you don't really see Robocop doing that actual kind of beat police work that often, because obviously in the films Robocop is up against a sort of big bad. Now that does come into it in this game. There is a big bad, and it's full of kind of throwbacks to the films and the first two films in particular, because it's set between the second and third film. It basically is serving as an alternative third film, I think. And the one we actually got was terrible, so that's but like it understands so that, the cool factor of Robocop, and then the kind of the intellectual, the more cerebral side of Robocop. This game understands both of those things impeccably, and it really uses them here wonderfully to base every single mechanic of the game around. As I say, like that first old Detroit area is a really good introduction to the fact that, like, okay, this is a Robocop adventure, but you're kind of like, you're doing the nitty gritty, and we are going to look at like an America not in decline, but an America that has in fact declined. Like, it's already, like, the decline isn't even in the decline phase. The decline is in the like like the only way is up sort of phase. So like and it's got a lot of stuff in it that I don't know, like how often like you've seen the films and stuff, but like it's got a lot of references, as I say, to like I don't want to like spoil it, because like if people who like Robocop fans will probably dig a lot of the stuff, but there's things in this game which are references to shots in the original game that weren't in the original film that weren't even in the original cut of the film. Like there's something to do, like something with I don't want to spoil it, but something to do with the gas station. There's some brilliant stuff in there that that's really subtle. There's a lot of just straight up fan service as well.
Yeah.
And as you would expect, but I don't think it's gratuitous. I think it's very earned, because by the time it starts throwing the fan service at you, it is already demonstrated that this is an intelligent product based on those films and is a worthy sequel to them.
And I think, it's, before we kind of wrap up, I think it is worth just saying that you should go in with slightly lowered expectations, that this isn't like an incredible blow your socks off something like Baldur's Gate 3 or whatever, where the raw quality of it is just like knocking your socks off, like I say. But because there's some silly stuff, there's some bad checkpoints, there's some unclear objectives, there's some terrible checkpoints, there's some weird graphical bugs, there's all of that sort of stuff.
Every time there's a cut in a cutscene, it like glitches out. Have you noticed?
Yes,
that?
I have noticed that. And there's some silly stuff, like you're always when you're wondering about, you're collecting evidence of crimes constantly, so it's a bit incongruous where you're in the middle of a gunfight, but you're stuffing stolen wallets and handbags into your pockets and stuff, which is pretty silly as you clump around. But it's definitely a game that's more than the sum of its parts, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Game that's more than the sum of its parts. In much the same way that the original film was, and I think the last thing I want to point out is just that this is made by a small European team.
Is it?
And if you watch Robodoc, which is the 4-part documentary about the making of the first film that was recently released, it's a fascinating look at how that film came about. A film which was conceived as we say, like a satire of Reagan's America, but also was essentially greenlit because off the back of Terminator being massively successful as a low-budget kind of horror film about a robot skeleton. And the Suits saw that Robocop had that same kind of appeal. There's a slightly kind of goofy looking robots cutting about, shooting things, but there's a real kind of heart to it. And we can make it for not much money. And that film is like, it really shows like how much it's straining under its budget quite a lot, as this game does. And one wonderful thing that's pointed out in that game is that Paul Verhoeven is a Dutch director, hadn't worked in Hollywood really before this. They make the point that like you can't really do a proper biting satire of America without an outsider's perspective. And I think the production of this game mirrors that in some ways. Basically, the genesis of this game mirrors the genesis of the original film in all the right ways. And it, just like the original film, is a bit janky. And it's kind of like a jankier version of some other things that you've seen, but it's a really good time, and it shows its budget in a lot of places, but it also shows that the people working on it are incredibly talented. It's good. Play it.